Really great to see you all here. And thank you for spending your afternoon here in this room with other tech enthusiasts who listen to me talk about the future of work. So that's a concept I'm going to share with you today. And by future of work, I mean working remotely. Who here actually have worked remotely? Okay, actually about a lot of people. Okay, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Okay, who here works full-time remotely? Keep your hands if you work full-time remotely. Okay, so you see a lot of people drop their hands. And keep your hands up. Keep your hands if your company, everybody works remotely without an office. Okay, so you see, okay, you can put your hand down now. So you should see that, in this little survey, a lot of people have worked remotely, but still not all companies are distributed. And there's a lot of companies who still have an office. And although we might have remote working experience in the past, I just want to share with you today that despite that it is common, some people still face challenges in adapting this remote work mindset or actually rolling this out to the entire organization. So I believe that there's stuff that everyone can learn from. So I'm here to talk about today that despite the popular belief, remote work actually allows you to do your best work. And I'm going to talk about who is doing it, why they're remote, and how to do it right. And before I talk about the future of work, let's talk about the present of work. Ghost Mountain is a remote programmer, and he wrote this tweet in 2016. He writes, 1995, the information superhighway will mean anyone can do anything from anywhere. 2015, must be willing to relocate to San Francisco. And sadly, in 2018, that's actually still the case. Primarily must relocate to London, to San Francisco, to Amsterdam, to whatnot. And a lot of companies seem to still have this like, you must come on site and work on site kind of mindset. So let me introduce myself. My name is Shen. I'm an independent designer, consultant, speaker, mentor. I do a lot of things. I'm a part of this global freelance community called code.talks, and we work with freelance designers, developers, financial consultants, and we pair them with clients. And I'm also volunteering my time at Ladies at UX, which is a global organization that aims to promote diverse voices and empower women in tech. So I have worked remotely for about 7 years now for big and small companies, and also I've worked in distributed teams, worked as a remote freelancer, and yeah, right now I am independent, and I love remote work. I found that remote work can actually solve many problems in the workplace, from productivity, talent pool, diversity, and location problems. So let's talk about productivity. Who here has this experience before? Raise your hand. Yeah, actually a lot of people. When you're programming, when you're designing something complicated flow, or you're reading a lot of user research insights, and suddenly this colleague tap on your shoulder, like, hey, Jenny, do you have a second? You're like, what? And suddenly you lose your train of thought, and you kind of break out of this flow that you were in. And it's actually really hard to get back to. And I have a lot of those kind of experiences before. However, this kind of open office is still the norm in tech companies. You work shoulder to shoulder with colleagues, and there are no cubicles, and people freely interact and chat with each other. But did you know that in this open plan office, people are actually 66% less productive because of the noise, because of distraction, because of sound levels? And so yeah, so open office are not the best place for people to do their productive work. And how about the talent pool? How about the hiring problem? I talk to a lot of people in tech, and they always tell me how it is really difficult to find the right people, to find smart people to work in a company. And that's actually seems to be a case for a lot of tech companies. But have you considered that if you're looking only within your city, you're limiting the number of people who can apply and who you can hire? Have you thought about how companies actually thought about opening this talent pool to the whole world and allow the best people around the world to apply for the job? And also diversity. There was I saw this agency's bio page, and they are based in Hardenberg, Netherlands. Actually, it's quite near Germany. And their about page actually kind of looked like this, where you can kind of see it's like kind of like same profile, and they are actually a digital agency, and they work with clients and to solve problems and create solutions. And I was thinking that maybe they seem to have difficulty hiring people with different diverse backgrounds, and as an agency, they will probably want more creative and inclusive solutions, which a lot of agencies want. So by focusing on the talent pool in their local small town, maybe they're actually missing out a lot of great talent around the world. And also location problems. So location problems, I mean like traffic, I mean increased cost of living, and it's actually happening to San Francisco, London, Amsterdam, Berlin, New York, you name it. Those tech big cities where companies are attracting people to move there, to work there, to live there. What happens? You get a lot more traffic, and you also get cost of living goes up, and it's just become less and less nice to live for everyone because of the fact that companies want people to move there and work there. So I'm going to share some data actually about remote work and how it's actually a global phenomenon that some companies seem to find the solutions to these problems, and they start to adapt a flexible work style, allowing people to work more flexibly. Let's watch the video. So as you see in this video, Encode and Remotes here, they did a survey, and they found that a lot of people actually start to adapt this remote work lifestyle, traveling lifestyle, and it's global phenomenon. And according to Peter Levels, which is the founder of Nomad Lives, like entrepreneur, nomad, and he said that he claims that there will be 1 billion digital nomads by 2035. How he calculated that is based on that in 2035, there's going to be 9 billion people, and 6 billion will be working people. And in the 6 billion people, the estimate is that half of them will be freelancers. And based on the half freelancer, 1 in 3 could be nomads. So that's where you get where he got the number of 1 billion nomads by 2035. Also, according to a survey at Global Leadership Summit London, people estimate that by 2020, half of the workforce will be remote. Either they are not working in a traditional workplace, or more than half of their company will be remote. And speaking of remote companies, you already know there's a lot of famous remote companies like Buffer, GitHub, Automatics, Stack Overflow, Basecamp, and whatnot. But they're not the only remote companies. A lot more companies are starting to adapt and join this remote revolution, from product companies, digital agencies, tools, productivity tools, you name it, and so on. A lot more companies are joining this remote revolution. But not all of them are distributed, moving, nomadic teams like Buffer. So Joe Gascoigne wrote this blog post, and he summarized different types of remote companies. On the left spectrum, you have the traditional office-based workplaces, and on the far right spectrum, you have the distributed team with nomads, which is what Buffer is. So in the middle, you have office from work from home options. You can have remote teams in the same time zone. You can have remote team in many different time zones. So companies kind of choose what kind of remote company they want to be. So what made companies kind of change their mind, or what made a company to decide that they want to be a remote company? Did they decide it from day one, or did they actually have an office and then later they lost the office? This is Joe Gascoigne. A lot of you might know him from Buffer. Buffer actually had an office in San Francisco. So they had office in San Francisco, but they kept the work from home option for employees. So as the team grew, they started to see people in London, in New York, and people started working from home, and less people were based in San Francisco or even going to the San Francisco office. And he sought advice from many people to decide whether they want to commit Buffer to a distributed team or they actually should keep the office. So he got advice from David Cancel, which is the CEO of Drift, and he said, commit to either the whole team in the same location or the whole team distributed. So kind of like the two very different choices. But mixing the two probably won't feel too great because you might end up with a scenario where you have an office and you have people who are not in the office. But like if everything happens within the office, the people who are not in the office could feel like they're second-class citizens. So from that advice, Joel decided to not really renew the lease and commit Buffer to a distributed team. This is Melissa. Melissa Ng is the founder of Melody. It's a product design studio, and they're nomadic with about 7 to 8 people. The reason why she wants her company to be remote is because she loves traveling. And when she founded a company, she didn't want to stop traveling, so she gave the employees the same freedom and flexibility to travel. And in a remote company, she realized that people feel more trusted. They have more flexibility, more autonomy, and that they actually are perhaps also as productive than compared in the office. And they don't believe in clocking in, being stuck to 9 to 5. And they also really enjoy having the freedom to see the world and channeling their experiences into their designs. And also you will know Jason Fried is the founder and CEO of Facecamp, and they love remote work so much that they wrote books, and actually they wrote several books about how to work and how remote work works. So they, according to Jason, meaningful work actually takes, meaningful work requires uninterrupted time, but that's not what modern offices set out to be. So in a modern office, you're just one interruption after the other, another. And he said that you'll be surprised how much quality work can be done via video connections and share screens. Like he talks about how meaningful work can be done when people don't have any distractions and are simply focusing on times in their zone. And he also advocates that for managers or a company who have the deciding power is that you cannot let your employees work out of fear. Remote work, if the company is worried that some person is going to slack off, then remote work is actually the least of the problems. So that's what he advocates. Okay, how about on an individual level? Like, why do I remote work? I work remotely because I found that I have higher productivity. This is a timeline of when I was working on site in Amsterdam. So I'm based in the Netherlands and I live in Amsterdam. And I used to work as a full-time employee on site for some time. So my work days are 9 to 5, and I will get up at 8, get ready, and I will cycle to work at 8:30, and I will start my day at 9. So I do a bit of work until we have a stand-up at 10:30. So, okay, I'll go to the meeting, and then we update each other what's going on. At 11, I'm back to work. I work a bit until noon, where it's actually the designated time for my team to have lunch. So I work at a company where there's like 500 people and there's a cafeteria, but each team are assigned with a time slot to go have lunch because otherwise the cafeteria will get super crowded. So at 12 o'clock, doesn't matter what I'm doing, I actually have to go to lunch because you respect each other's time slot. So at 12, I go to have lunch, I socialize with colleagues, chat about stuff, and I finished lunch at 1. So at 1 o'clock, I continue to go back. I go back to work, and I continue to work on my project until about 2 p.m. Like usually a colleague will ask the team to go outside and have a Starbucks. And of course, I don't want to be the loner. So when people say, hey, who wants to go to Starbucks? And you of course, want to join them. So at 2 o'clock, you go out to have a coffee. And when you're back, it's 2:30. So 2:30, I try to catch up on my emails or do some work. And I realize I have a meeting at 3. So at 3 o'clock, I have to go to the meeting, of course, talk about projects and whatnot. And after the meeting, it's now 4. It's like, where's the day? Where's the day gone? So at 4, I try to go back to my project. I do some more work until 5 p.m. People start to leave, and I start to hear music from somewhere that people are getting into the happy hour mood. So I join people for drinks because, of course, you don't want to be a loner. And that's usually how a day at the office has been like for me. And as you can see here, the day is threaded into different bursts, and even though I am physically at the office for 8 hours a day, I don't feel like I'm getting 8 hours of work done. But compare that to my remote work day. So I work remotely. I work either from a cafe, co-working space, or from my home office for some time now. I wake up at 7:30, just slightly earlier than when I used to get up to go to work. So at 7:30, I work on my side project. At 7:30, I like to have this quiet time for myself to work on an article, to do a mentorship session, or to write a new talk. And at 9 a.m., I switch my screen, I switch my application to client work. So I sign into the client Slack, and I open my email, I check my emails, and I start working until 11 a.m., where I will have a sync up with teams in Asia. So I would go to the stand-up, and I update my progress, and then get back to my work at 11:30. And at 11:30, I continue working, and whenever I feel hungry, then I will, if I work from home, then I would just cook myself a really quick and really healthy lunch. And I can do that whenever I want. I don't have to wait. I don't actually have a designated lunchtime. I just eat whenever I want. So I have an interrupted afternoon where I can really focus on work until I have a meeting about 3 or 4 p.m. I usually have them towards the end of the day. And I go to the meeting, get stuff done, and then come back to do my project at 4. And at 5 p.m., that's when my workday ends. Then I switch over to side project mode again, where I could work on volunteer work, and I could sync up with teams based in the Pacific time zone. So I feel like I get a lot more done when I work remotely, and I'm not sure maybe that's also how you feel, but at least when I calculate my workday, when I work in the office, I got 5 hours of productive work, but when I work remotely, I get 6 hours of productive work. And not to mention, I got an extra 3.5 hours to work on my side project. So if I would compare my 2 different work days, when I work in an office in a full-time job, I most of the time have energy and time for only one side project. I have to pick between my hobbies, like my hobby is lettering, illustration, and photography, and also other stuff. And I have to pick between that, volunteering, or writing. Because after whole day at the office socializing with many people and with all the noise, distractions, and whatnot, like me as an introvert, I feel like my energy is already gone. I'm very tired, and at the end of the day, I just want to surf YouTube or Netflix, and I don't really have much energy to work on a side project. But now I work remotely, I feel like I have more control over my time, and I actually free up my time to have this extra pieces of time to do mentoring, blogging, volunteering, and also conference speaking. All of that is done while having a full-time freelancing job. So being remote allowed me to, things that being remote just gave me more time and also more flexibility to do things. And also as a remote worker, I have the freedom and flexibility to travel. In the last 12 months, I've been to 17 countries. On average, I am traveling to 1 or 2 countries a month. And so far, I've been to 51 countries and counting. And all of that is done while actually I had a job. I actually had client work even when I'm traveling. And having the flexibility to travel allowed me to have a global perspective. So global means to be global, but also local. So you're thinking globally, but you're acting locally. As a designer who travels and designs while she travels, it helps me to gain a global perspective of the real world, real users, and be able to reflect my experiences in the designs and actually getting to research, getting to know the local users. So if you would like to embrace the future of work, if all of that sounds good, you think, okay, flexibility, I'm in, autonomy, I'm in. Okay, how do we embrace the future of work? How do we actually start? Let me introduce the 4 C's of remote work: centralization, communication, connection, and culture. The 4 C's. Centralization. Centralization means where your work is stored. In a typical workplace, your work would be your files, your books, and your printouts, your design wall, whatever it is, your analog assets. In a remote workplace, where do they go now? They go to the cloud, or they go to whatever online repository you have. There's one central place where you store all your files, all the access, team directory, time zones, where people know where to look for things. And you will have a single source of truth when you work remotely. And you also should redefine your communication. You should redefine how people communicate in a remote environment. So in a traditional workplace, people would go to a meeting room. They will, of course, talk in person. They will talk about project in person. But what happens in a lot of cases in a typical meeting is that, like in a photo, people bring their laptop, and a lot of time people are just working on their own laptop on different things. But then it makes me think, like, why are people even there? If they're all like going to the same room, but they are working on different things, you might as well just not go to the same room. So what to do in a remote environment? You have the same. You have a virtual meeting, and you can do that with all hands. You can do stand-ups. You can do catch-ups with with remote communication tools. And the video call plus the screen sharing should be your new normal routine. Should be as normal as talking to each other when you work in a remote company. What if you have to come together to do a brainstorming session or a strategy session where people actually have to collaborate? Typically, you do that with a wall, you do that with whiteboards, you do that with sticky notes, but how do you do that remotely? Well, you can actually do that remotely as well with a lot of tools like real-time board, Mural, Envision, and whatnot. So these kind of tools allow people to collaborate in real time, and you can actually work on a lot more things compared to when you have a physical wall and you just print out your designs or put all the stickies. Like, imagine having a gigantic wall to host all of this stuff. That would be really massive. But when you work online in this online tool, you can actually have a really big canvas, and you can just scroll to whatever thing that you're working on. And also, aside from redefining communication, you need to redefine how people connect with each other. So usually in onboarding, when you welcome an employee to your company, you tell them, this is where you sit, this is your monitor, this is your MacBook, this is your book, this is your stuff, this is your guidebook, this is where design team sits, this is where marketing sits, this is your manager. Like, go to him or her if you have problems or questions. Similarly, in a remote environment, you also do onboarding. But instead, you have a virtual welcome, and you still tell people this is the development channel, this is the QA channel, and this is your manager's handle. This is how you can find our team directory, and this is like who has access. This is where you can go find access and all the other information. You provide this information virtually. What about actual face-to-face interaction with people? How do you facilitate conversations and interactions without meeting face-to-face? Well, you can do the same with apps. There's Slack. Actually, who uses Slack here? Raise your hand. Pretty much, yeah, a lot of people. Yeah, you can use Slack, you can use Twist, and you can try to replicate this water cooler channel and interaction on Slack. And you can draw each other birthday cards, you can show pictures of your babies, and you can give each other internet hugs. You can try to recreate this vibe inside Slack or whatever other team communication tool of your choice. And also, just because you work remotely, it does not mean that you can never see each other in person. A lot of companies like Envision, Todoist, Hanel, they have retreats. They have retreats once or twice a year. They gather all employees to come to one place, get to know each other in person, and put a face behind the name on Slack. So this is something that you could consider when you want to redefine how people connect with each other in a remote environment. And lastly, you need to redefine the culture. Redefine the culture of your company. A lot of people, when it comes to culture, they think that by placing a foosball table, then now they have a great and fun team culture. But is it really it? Is the foosball really the center of culture for a company? Actually, personally, I don't think it is so. For me, culture of a team, of a company is more about, do people trust each other? Do people like each other? Do people know what they're doing? Do they feel like they are contributing to something bigger than themselves? And can people go through the good time and bad times together? This is not just about fun. It's not just about foosball. It's not just about happy hour or beer and whatnot. Like, culture is a lot more than these things. And you cannot recreate culture by just this or with nice decor or shiny MacBooks or big desks. However, in a remote environment, culture, it is harder to cultivate, mostly because people are behind a screen. And culture is also a team effort. You cannot rely on just one person or two person, and you cannot force it. So it is more difficult than in traditional environment, but there are steps you can take to work towards it. You can start by having an open and transparent way of communication. So Buffer and GitLab, they work in the open, and they have they really value transparency and really value openness. So in the traditional workplace, you might have silos and private emails and private groups where only a few people have access to the information. But in a remote company, I will advocate for more open, more transparent way of work where everyone has this information. Everyone knows where to access stuff. Because there's nothing worse than if you're looking for something and you don't know who has access to it, how to find this person, when the person is working or like where they are. It's just like a nightmare when you're working remotely. So try to redefine how your team communicate to each other, and also the open and transparent culture. And also, just because you work remotely does not mean you cannot have fun. Sure, you might have a foosball in a typical workplace, so you can also talk about pets, talk about mismatching socks, and send each other birthday cards. You can cultivate a fun remote culture when you are collaborating, online. And I think the thing to start here is that you have to start looking for people who can actually be a contributor to the team culture. You need to look for people who are already actively encouraging each other and who can actually bring something to the table. Like, what you don't want in a remote team is people who are lurking behind a screen, never saying anything on Slack, never reacting with any emojis. Like, that's the kind of people who are probably not very suitable for full remote work. So you want to hire people who actually can contribute to the culture. So the first C, let me summarize. So that's centralization, communication, connection, and culture. So each one of them could be a challenge, and it's not easy things to change today or tomorrow. Because if you imagine that you're telling your company, hey, we're shutting down the office tomorrow and everybody will be working from home, you'll probably see a lot of shocked faces. It's not easy to adapt in just a day or two. But I like to encourage you, and I also like to talk about, like, let's take a moment to imagine a workplace where people have the freedom to control time. Okay, just imagine you don't have a commute anymore. You have more time to spend with your loved ones, with your family, your children, or you have more time to pursue your hobbies or personal fulfillment, like traveling the world. In this company, all communication and work are intentional. Everyone is contributing to the company, and all the values, the goals, the visions are aligned. And employees are rewarded for results instead of time being spent in the office. That's where I believe we will do the best work. Thank you. Questions?
You mentioned in the office you don't want to be the loner if you don't attend to the Starbucks meeting, but in home office or remote office you are the loner all the time. So how about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like me personally, so I am an introvert. I mean, there might be extroverts who disagree with me. So I feel like when I work in an office, one of the reasons that I do go to, have coffee with a colleague is also because of peer pressure. I feel like if everyone else is going, then I feel like I am the weird person if I want to stay and do focused work. So that's one thing. And also when I work from home, yes, I am the loner at home, but I also make a lot more time to socialize. And that's something I actually didn't include in my talk for interest of time, is that I organize events, and I also travel for a lot of events. I am socializing with a lot of people wherever I go. So my socializing has changed. Instead of socializing with a colleague because the company gives those people to you, I choose who I socialize with. I go to the meetups I'm interested. I reach out to people that I want to know, and I go to the conference I want to be at and socialize with those people. So actually, I think my socializing life has become a lot more, like a lot more since I work remotely, because I now have the freedom to choose my social life.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your talk. I would like to work remotely on my own. It's strange to hear myself. Yeah, Yahoo introduced remote work, and they also revoked it just a couple of months ago. And they had their reasons, because the people worked on their own side projects. They didn't meet any deadlines. They had a lack of trust. And those are also the arguments I face in German companies when it's about remote work. How do you cope with that?
So let me just try to see if I understand you correctly. So the problem you're facing now is that people are slacking off and they are not delivering based on the deadline. Is that right?
Yeah, also, and deliver or working in teams is also about trust, seeing others, for example, when they don't deliver, and help them a bit more when you see each other face to face.
Yeah, so I think there's two things. First, about trust, and second, about deadlines. Let's talk about the deadlines first. Whether in a traditional workplace where you can see each other face to face, and in a remote context, I think that deadlines need to be communicated really well. Just because you're working remotely does not mean that you should totally forget about sprints, forget about deadlines. Like actually, it's even more important to have like deadline very clearly communicated. Deadlines, consequences effect to other teams if something is not delivered. So communicate the deadlines really well and also hire people who can actually get stuff done, whether remotely or not remotely. Like you do need to hire good people who are who can actually get stuff done. And regarding trust, if you need to build trust, I think when people join a remote team, it's actually a good idea to get them to talk to each other. So you can have, for example, like I showed in the talk, there's like water cooler channels. You can also facilitate conversations if the reason maybe is because communication that, okay, you don't know the person, so you feel afraid to tell the person that you're delayed. But maybe at the start, you just try to, if there's a new employee, then you introduce them to the team. You have one-on-one conversation to try to build trust so that, okay, if there's going to be any delay, I'm going to tell the manager or I'm going to communicate very clearly. And also another thing is that you need to establish expectations in a company that people need to communicate that if there's a delay for whatever reason, or that if the person needs more time, or there's a bug or whatever, you need to communicate it. So hire people who are good communicators and set the expectations for the entire company. That's how usually remote team works.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So you mentioned diversity as one of the advantages for remote companies. How does that play? Because I think diversity in terms of like communication might be a bit difficult than if it's like in the office actually.
I don't understand what you mean by communication is more difficult and how that relates to diversity.
Yeah, like what do you mean by diversity as being one of the advantages?
Okay, sure. Diversity being one of the advantages. So like in the example I showed, that was an agency based in Hardenberg. And because they are hiring from a small town, basically like they are only hiring people around the small town because a lot of people are not going to move from a different country or a different city to Hardenberg. Then basically the talent pool is whoever live in the city or want to move to the city. But if you hire globally, if you hire remotely, you can hire people from Nepal, you can hire people from Mexico, you can hire people from Germany or Taiwan, and you can actually look outside of your own demographic and look for a more diverse crowd. Does that answer your question?
Jenny, thanks for the great speech. What do you think about the effects of remote work on commitment of employees, on retention, on the time the actual employee stays at one company?
So based on what I know and based on the research I've read, actually remote work increases retention. I think that's how you say it. So basically like employees stay at the company for longer because they are happier with work. They feel like they're contributing to something. And also a lot of people leave because sometimes the reason is that they want to pursue other things and the company don't give them the flexibility or freedom to. So now the employee, they don't have to quit their job to travel the world. So based on the stats I see, remote work actually increases retention. And I think in the video earlier shown is that people like are staying with a company longer, and companies don't have to hire new people, train new people, simply by giving employees more freedom.
Yeah. Hi. Here I am.
Yeah, I see you. Yeah, it's really difficult. It's so bright on stage.
So I think you would explain yourself like a nomadic worker somehow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you had any issues with getting like a visa or work permit? So like how much more complicated is this to work remotely as a nomad?
Yeah, so I think there's different ways of nomad. So I'm a freelancer, so I have my own registered company, and some other are remote employees, and they are employed by one company. So it depends on which way you go. You can have like different arrangements. But typically, like right now, remote working is still kind of a gray area in terms of like laws and whatnot, except Estonia. Estonia is actually granting a digital nomad visa, and they have this like e-registration and whatnot. So right now, how remote workers do is that when they go to a new country, you go on a tourist visa because you are employed by your employer or employed by yourself, and like you are not fighting, local jobs with the local people, if that makes sense. So depending on if you want to be a freelancer or if you want to be a remote employee, like there are arrangements to make it happen. But like being a remote nomadic person does not make the visa harder.
Okay, hi.
Sorry.
So you had this as a quote that remote workers might feel as I'm here.
Oh yeah, I see you. Yeah, hi.
Might feel as second level citizens when you mix a remote team with a local team.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with that, or do you have any research data on that?
So that's based on what Joe Gascoigne said, and then he quoted David Cancel. So I think right now I cannot give you the exact stats, but then I will encourage you to look up what David Cancel said. I will also do some research. I personally do have experience with that. I used to work in a distributed team as a freelancer, and then there were offices in New York, in Poland, and in Hong Kong, and in London, and I was the only one in Amsterdam. So when the company do the all hands, they would say something like, do people in London have any questions? Do people in Hong Kong have any questions? And they would just skip Amsterdam because I am the only one there, because they don't have yet an office there. So they would like remember where all the offices are, and they would just skip Amsterdam. So I feel like, oh, okay, am I not part of a company? It was like kind of weird. So yeah, that's like my experience. And also, the second-class citizen situation is when people in Hong Kong, like in that client, in that office, is that they would chat among each other, and nobody else would know what's talked about. Nobody will else what's going on there. So it's kind of like a different situation, but when your processes are not right, then you can give people this kind of feeling that, oh, because I'm not in the office, I don't get all of the information, and that's something that I think companies still can improve when adapting remote work.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the salary or prices for freelancers or employees. How can you guarantee that if you work in Hamburg or, I don't know, in Mexico, that the prices are fair for both of them? Because you got different cost of livings in Hamburg, of course. So how can you guarantee to respect both backgrounds?
Are you talking about more like salary or your product pricing?
Well, no, more salary or prices for freelancers.
Yeah. Okay. So you mean like what you charge as a freelancer?
Sure. And how to guarantee that it's fair for both? The one in Mexico doesn't have the same costs like the one in Hamburg.
Right. So there's different things. So there's like cost of living in different countries, and there's also what the freelancer decides to charge. So it's just like, for example, if a company is based in New York and they charge New York prices, and there's going to be companies based in China and they charge Chinese prices. Like for a freelancer, the person is the one to decide how much he or she wants to charge. And then some people might decide the price to be an international, US standard, European standard, and whatnot. And other people will charge whatever they want to charge. So I think it's the same, like if you look at it globally, like how companies price their product, it's the same. If you want to sign up a product like, I don't know, Agolia or Envision, like the price you pay doesn't matter where you're based, it's more or less the same, except like different taxes, of course. But people kind of have a more international pricing model. But then if today a Mexican designer, Indian designer, developer, and they want to charge local prices, that's up to them. Like I cannot be the one to say, no, you should charge a different price. So it's up to the freelancer.
Well, that makes it easy for the company to take one from Mexico because the one from Hamburg may be a bit more expensive. So that's the problem for people living in more expensive cities or parts of the world.
Yeah, I think so too, but that's also what's happening in terms of like manufacturing. That's happening everywhere. It's really depending on what the company or the freelancer can offer, right? Like if you have both the same really good product or really good services, and from a business standpoint, who do you go for? Maybe some people want to go for the more trustworthy one, the one they want to have a long-term relationship. There's also going to be companies who are going to be looking at just cost. So per companies, you have to think from a company's perspective, like who is it that they want to hire? And I think pricing shouldn't be the only thing for any company to beat their competition, because that's just kind of like a race towards the bottom. So you can try to think like if today you're from a place where the cost of living is high and you do have to charge high, what else can you bring to the table aside from competing with somebody from a cost of living where it's low? So you have to think about what can you bring to the table. But it's a complicated question. I'm happy to talk more with you. Yeah, here.
Hi, up here in the corner.
Okay, I see you.
So thanks for the talk. I think especially your point about the international global talent pool is really important. I personally work for a company which has development sites in several European countries by now. But that was just the first step. By now we have like a smaller percentage of employees who work completely remote from home office or from co-working spaces. Yeah. And by now we already set up our first, what we call a fully dispersed team. So none of those team members are actually co-located in one of our offices. They are all working from their home offices or co-working spaces. But the challenges we as a company really face there, as a German company, that might just be a German or European problem, but there are like taxation issues, we talk about health insurance. If you're employed by a German company and you live in a different European country for more than 183 days or something like that, you'd have to pay taxes in both countries, and it gets really complicated and messy. For those teams that we have set up so far, what we actually have, we have legal entities in all of those European countries, but it just doesn't scale. You can't just create legal companies in legal entities in 140 different countries or even more. Do you have any experience with that? For the companies you worked for so far, how that worked out? And are there any solutions that you know of? Because we as a company are really struggling with that.
Yeah, that's actually a really tricky question. I personally don't, because my clients have not grown like that big yet. Like I think we were 30 to 40. So then, but my client does have legal entities set up in like Hong Kong and US and Poland and UK and whatnot. So that's kind of like approach they tend to go. So my suggestion would be look at how global companies do it. And like Buffer is very transparent with how they do it, and there's also a lot of resources. Unfortunately, I cannot be more helpful, but I would encourage you to look up like global companies, even like Airbnb, they have like legal entities like really all around the world. Maybe that's the way to go. Unfortunately, like I am not German and also not a tax expert, so I cannot give you more advice, but I'm happy to brainstorm with you afterwards.
Thank you.
I think there was a question they've been raising for a while.